Hello everyone. Welcome to Module 1, Unit 1 of Leadership and Managerial Skills, HRM 3440. In this unit, we will cover the big idea of what is it that managers and leaders do, what is their impact, how are they effective, and then I'll ask you to turn the table and to think about yourself as a leader or a manager and to focus on your own strengths and weaknesses, and how it is that you hope to develop as a leader throughout this course and beyond. So let's start by talking about managers. There was a Gallup poll that helped us to understand the impact of managers within organizations. You'll see by this slide that only 30% of US workers are engaged at work, meaning in engagement surveys, when we connect with our employees and ask them if they're motivated at work, if they're feeling committed to the work that they do, if they feel that the work that they do is useful and worthwhile and it makes a contribution, only 30% of people in the US believe that that is the case. At the same time, managers account for at least 70% of the variance in engagement scores. So within the same organization, the difference in engagement scores is explained by the manager at least 70% of the time. That's what we mean by the variance. The variance explained means what cause can we attribute to this effect? And it appears that the manager has an important relationship with employee engagement. So the disengagement caused by bad managers costs US businesses about $450 million each year. These are fairly staggering statistics and really underline the importance of managers within today's organization. So what is it that managers actually do that makes such a big difference to the organization? Now, you will have done some reading, or you will be doing some reading in Becoming a Manager by Linda Hill that outlines the process of becoming a manager and some of the things that employees or new managers discover is a large part of managerial work. You can see that some of the things that are different from managers versus being an employee is that you're doing a lot more dealing with people problems, people issues, the interaction and engagement with others, whether it's actually having to do with the work itself or having to do with supporting and motivating people within the organization and keeping them connected to the organization in more social ways. So managers have a fairly big role. There is a scholar, Henry Mitzberg, who has come up with this organization of what managers actually do. So you can see by these circles of increasing size that managers do a fair number of things with the different constituents. The manager is at the center of this diagram, and we know that the manager spends a lot of time communicating, controlling, so scheduling work, organizing the way in which work is done. On the left-hand side here, you have framing, and framing really means that the manager is the person who explains what has to be done and why it has to be done. So gives it some sort of meaning for the employee, and that meaning can make a big difference, right? If we understand that, to give the classic Disney example, if you work at the Disney parks, you don't really talk about picking up garbage or cleaning the parks or cleaning the concession stands. You talk about making magic for the patrons, for the children, for the people that visit Disney year over year. So there's a different frame, there's a different message, and it all comes from the leadership within that organization. This is what we're actually doing there. On the next plane in Mitzberg's model here, you see information. And the information plane, that is this plane around communicating and scheduling. On the next plane, you see the people plane. And this is the plane on which you're dealing directly with people, leading them, motivating them, helping them to organize their work, helping them to remain connected to their work and to one another as co-workers. You're linking individuals both within and outside of the organization. And under that, you have the action plane. This is where managers are thinking more strategically. They're thinking a little bit more long-term. They're thinking about plans for the future, and they're taking action towards these future plans. They're also often responsible for relationships that exist with people outside of the organization, be that partner groups or other institutions or other organizations, and often end up doing much of the deal making, the negotiations. So within this course, when we talk about communication, we will do some work on negotiations and understanding how negotiations take place. Just a little bit of work on negotiations. So all of this becomes the work of the manager. So the interesting question, and you can see by some of the readings that you've done, is how prepared or how do we prepare people for these types of roles? Well, often it's the successful employee that moves into a managerial role, but as you can see by some of your readings, this can be problematic because there are a different set of skills required from managers than there are from employees. If you're a really great engineer and you move into engineering management, that doesn't, by virtue of that promotion, doesn't give you the skills required to do that job. So let's take a closer look, or let's get another viewpoint on some managerial activities or some managerial, the role that managers have to fill. Another scholar, Luthens and his colleagues, came up with a list of managerial activities. It's very similar to Mintzberg's, but here we get a little bit more detail about the types of things that need to be done by a manager. That's exchanging routine information, disciplining, so working with employees who are not performing up to standard, planning for the future, managing conflict, which is an interesting one. That's a fairly particular skill, a very difficult thing to do because conflict is a fairly difficult it's a difficult social situation. So to have to intervene and to take leadership within those moments can be particularly trying. Decision making can be difficult. Handling paperwork, socializing, or politicking, and you read in your readings about politics and how difficult it can be to work with the politics within an organization. Training and development, helping to develop your employees, helping them to plan for their future careers that may not be relevant to their job, but may be relevant to their own personal growth around their career path. Interacts with outsiders, motivates and reinforces, controls the work and the manner in which work is done. And then there's also the HR activities of staffing and recruiting and finding the appropriate people to do the work. So how much time do managers actually spend doing these things? Well, here's a pie diagram of the time allotted by an average manager. You can see that an average manager spends a fair amount of time in communication, a smaller amount of time in networking and HRM type work, like staffing and recruitment and training, and then a fair amount of time in traditional management activities, so organizing work, helping to motivate teams, distributing work among team members, and so on and so on. So this is the average manager, but if we were to look at successful managers and effective managers, we see actually a very different diagram. So successful managers would be managers who end up getting a fair number of promotions and salary increases. And effective managers would be managers who are deemed to be very good at what they do. And we see that effective managers actually spend a fair amount of time communicating. This is one of the core activities that we see with effective managers. Whereas successful managers, what we see is a fair amount of time spent networking. So really making connections and some of this would involve promoting themselves and promoting the work that their group is doing and so on. So the allocation of activities is quite significant, is quite different depending on the effectiveness of the manager. So this is an interesting conundrum, as often we promote people, as I was noting earlier, from the work that they're doing into managerial roles as a reward, as a way of saying, great job, I love the way you do your work, I think you should move into management. And sometimes that can be a very difficult thing, as you will notice in some of your readings. Some people who do their jobs very well don't necessarily make great managers. I can think of a wonderful story, or an interesting story rather, of a paramedic who was an excellent paramedic and also a great communicator, very good at working with his peers, very good at working with his supervisors and the other people on his team. And so, of course, he was moved into management because he was just so good at his job. And in the end, it turns out that he hated it. He actually hated it, and he spent a good year in the role. And he was effective. He did fine in the role, and I think that his superiors would have been happy to keep him in the role. But he strongly disliked the work itself. He liked being a paramedic. He liked saving lives. He liked the work right on the front line. And he wasn't so keen on having to organize work, to stay in the background, not being to only being called in for the tough calls, and not being able to deal with some of the more rewarding calls where you get to deal with people who where things end well. And he struggled for quite some time and ended up actually taking a demotion. And that was difficult as well, because when he took the demotion, his colleagues became suspicious and wondered, well, why would he step down from the increase in pay, the increase in flexibility of work, the standard hours? Paramedics work quite difficult hours, and a supervisor would work a 9 to 5 or a bit more. They would have to cover most shifts, but they would work a much more predictable schedule. So it both in the promotion, it dissatisfied him, and then in the movement back to the regular ranks, it really led to some difficult social situations with his peers. So this transition to management, while we think of it as an inevitable thing if you do your job well, it really needs to be considered for the skills that are required within this job and the type of work that you will be doing and how you will be spending your time. Is this a place where you want to end up? Is this a place where you can thrive and flourish and do very well? Or will this be a challenge for you? Will this be do your strengths not align with the type of work required? It's something to consider as you prepare for your careers and as a manager, as you consider the promotion of others. So let's talk for a few minutes about the process of becoming a manager, and then I'm going to ask you to think more explicitly about your own path. So becoming a manager, there are a few things to think about, and this maps very closely onto some of the readings that you've done. That's the intent, that you're that you're thinking through some of the experiences that you've read about in the text for this particular module, or this particular unit. So as you're becoming a manager, the first step is that you're emerging into this role. So before you're even promoted to management, you might be given some opportunities, you can dip your toe into the water and assess your potential fit. Is this something that I want to do or don't want to do? And it's difficult. It can be difficult to assess sometimes because, first of all, your experiences that you get are fairly shallow, but also because there's a lot of people value the title of manager and the role of manager. So it can be a fairly there can be a bit of pressure to want to fill this role, or to think that you want to fill this role. And then there's the idea of becoming a manager. So you move into it and you're trying to figure out what this all means, and figuring out what your role means, and also figuring out your own identity. To use my earlier example, if you're a paramedic, you can talk about being a paramedic, but then when you move into management, who am I now if I'm not saving lives? If I'm not the person at the front line, how do I move from this role of having been a star performer as a paramedic into a managerial role where my identity or the reward that I feel has to come from something else? It can't come from saving a life or from being on the front lines, or from being able to do my job very well as a person who's doing the doing. Now I'm moving into a role where I need to support, encourage, and motivate others to do the primary work. And somehow I have to recreate or understand an identity that where my goals are a little bit different. They're not as precise. They're a little bit more ambiguous. And they're really around influencing people and supporting people to do their work. Then there's the idea of acting Learning to balance. So this is the moment where you're really transitioning into the role, and you're doing what you need to do and trying to figure out how to walk the line between the work and the people and all of the complexities of being a manager. This is, I think, something that your book, your text supports very well. And finally, you move into, if there's a successful transition, you move into thriving within the role. So you're able to plan ahead, and you can manage what's happening now, you can manage what's happening in the future, and you become very good with all of the interpersonal, the communication, and all of the other things that are required of management. So as you think through all of these, this transition and this idea of becoming a manager, I'm hoping that you can think about yourself and your own career trajectory. There are a number of activities to work through on this course website that encourage you to become more aware of yourself, your own strengths and weaknesses relative to managerial work. So I want you to think about becoming more in tune or understanding your own preferences, your own motivations. Why do you want to do the things that you want to do? Your own personality, understanding how each affects your thoughts and behavior, right? So I'll share a little bit about my own path with you in order to illustrate this idea. So as an academic, I have a certain set of responsibilities, and I will say I do the primary work of a university, right? So as an academic, a faculty member, you do the teaching, the research, and the service to the university, which is core to the function of the university. And then there are academic leaders, academic administrators. Those would be the chairs and directors of any given program or unit. Then more visibly, you'd be aware of your provost and your president within the university. But I spent a fair number of years, from about 2008 till very recently, actually, 2016. I spent those years in various administrative leadership roles. I was a master of a college, I was the undergraduate program director with an HRM, and I was the director of human resource management. So here's some things to know. I thrived in those roles. I did fairly well in those roles, and there was a lot of encouragement to keep going and to grow within administrative leadership and to keep taking on increasing roles. But it took me a little while to understand this was not my preference, nor was it really what motivated me. I really liked doing the primary work of a university. And it took me a fair amount of time to come to that self-awareness for a few reasons. One is that there's some esteem that you get from colleagues for being in leadership roles. There's a certain set of power, a bit of power that allows you to achieve things for your unit, for people who are important to you. And so it can be compelling to be in those types of roles. But it took me some time to really consider and think, well, what is it at the core that I enjoy doing? What is it? How would I like to spend my days? What motivates me? And who am I? And quite clearly, I view myself as an educator of young adults and anybody actually who's in this career preparation place. I view myself as a researcher who's very curious and interested in all kinds of issues around learning and motivation. And so I stepped back into a professorial role and almost immediately felt great relief to be here. So, I did the exploration on the job during my career, but I'm hoping that maybe you can think through some of these issues in advance. Self-awareness is critically important if you're looking for not only career satisfaction, but career success. So in order to develop your own self-awareness, I've provided you with a few activities, and I'll give you a little bit more direction as you work through these activities about the types of things that you should be thinking about. So to start, here are some questions that you can spend some time thinking through and ask yourself. I would even take out a piece of paper and start to maybe keep a journal through this class, or a place where you keep notes about your thoughts, and start to sketch through some of these things. Not all these questions or the questions in the self-assessment are answerable, and some of them will change over time as you have new experiences. But this awareness can really help. An awareness of yourself and the types of things that are important to you can help to guide your behavior and help to guide your path as you prepare for a career. So here are some things to think about. If you unexpectedly had a completely free afternoon, what would you do with that time? Is there an area of your life where you feel out of control or especially in control? Get a sense of the types of situations that you thrive in. Are you motivated by competition? What did you do for fun when you were 10 years old? Do you still do that activity, or would you like to do it? Do you find it easier to do things for people than to do them for yourself? On a typical night, what time do you go to bed, and how many hours of sleep do you get? Is there an activity that you love to do, yet somehow never seem to actually do? What people and activities energize you, make you feel depleted? Do you work well under pressure or deadlines? All of these questions describe different types of work environments and different types of roles within organizations. If you understand the conditions under which you thrive, the conditions under which you can be successful, you can start to think about choosing the types of experiences or guiding your career path. Or sometimes you don't have choice. Sometimes we all have to pay our dues. But working towards a career where you will be an environment where you can thrive. As you work through the other assessments that are on the course website, I'll ask you to think through these types of questions. My greatest strengths are, and my greatest weaknesses are. From these assessments, I am surprised by, and I am taking away. These types of questions and the questions on the previous slide can be used to help inform your first reflection journal for this course. Think about yourself. Focus on your own development, both today in today's unit and also in the units as we move through this course. That is the end of the brief lecture for Unit 1. I hope that you will move through the material within this unit and use it to really consider some of the questions we've asked here and to consider your own career path and how you might use this course to support it. Many thanks, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.